Hey everybody, in this video we're going to cover how to create dynamic inventory scripts for Ansible written in Python. So take a look at the environment I got set up really quick. We have a blank Python file that's going to act as our inventory file, and then I've gone ahead and I already previously made this script. I wrote it completely, then I executed it, and then I put the output into a JSON file so you could see what the desired end state is going to look like. So at the end of the day, Ansible just needs the script to output JSON formatted data. So then that data itself has to have a certain format. So within the inventory itself, there's going to be two portions. The first portion is going to be the host vars, or the host level variables, and then the second portion of the inventory is going to be the groups. Okay. Now, within the JSON data, the host vars portion of the inventory is always, according to Ansible, denoted with this underscore meta key. That's just an Ansible standard. So, and you don't have to do that actually. You could leave the underscore meta portion out of the inventory. So all of this. Sorry, my laptop freaked out on me. You could leave out this whole portion right here, but the Ansible documentation recommends that you keep that in. Basically, whenever you run playbooks against the inventory itself, if you contain the host vars within this meta section, it'll cache all of the host vars. If you don't do that, it will repeatedly look up each host in the inventory as it's running a playbook. So it's best practice to leave this in. But anyways, within the meta key, that has a value of a dictionary. You can see that with the opening and closing curly braces. Within that dictionary, we have another key called host vars, which is also set to a dictionary. Now within this dictionary, each key is going to be the host name of a device, and then that host name, which is the key in that dictionary, is going to be equal to another dictionary, and within that dictionary, each key value pair is going to be the variable name and then its value. So for example, in the output, we have this device, which is called Orco Lab 13 Red Router. Again, this key has a value of a dictionary. Within this dictionary, we have two variables defined that will be available to us when we run Ansible playbooks. We have the Ansible host variable, which is set to 10.99.13.1, and then we have the device type variable, which is just set to router. Okay, and you can see we have the same thing for these other four hosts. So red switch, yellow router, and yellow switch. Again, the host vars portion of the inventory is going to be underscore meta host vars, and then within this dictionary, each key is going to be a device's host name. Okay, and then moving on to the second portion of the inventory, after Ansible looks through the host vars, it will assume that every other top level key in this JSON data is going to be the name of a group. So in this case, after the host vars, the first key we hit is this all key. So it knows that we're making a group called all. And this key has a value of a dictionary right there. Now, groups in the Ansible inventory can have three predefined keys. We can have the children key, we can have a key called vars, or we can have a key called hosts. Okay, the hosts key is relatively simple. For example, you can see this red devices group I have below that has the hosts key. This is simply a list of device host names that will be a part of that group. Okay, if we define the children key, this will reference a list of other groups. Okay, so right here I'm saying the all group has 4 children, and each one of these children is just the name of a different group that I've actually defined below that. So you can see I have red devices, yellow devices, routers, and switches. These are all groups that I've defined below. So red devices, yellow devices, routers, and switches. So by doing that, what I can do is I can put hosts into the switches group, for example, and then if I make the switches group a child of the all group, which it is, then these devices that are part of the switches group will actually inherit any variables that I assign to the all group, right? Again, this all goes back to the same inventory logic that Ansible uses. It's the same thing from an INI file, except now we're working with JSON structured data. Anyway, so this is the desired output. So let's actually get to work building our inventory script. So to start off, we have to create what's called the shebang. Okay, the shebang is essentially telling Ansible what program to use to actually run this file. So when we use Ansible to run playbooks against this inventory, it's not actually running, on the command line, right? If we wanted to run this file, we would say Python 3 space and then the name of our file, right? Ansible doesn't have the ability to do that. Okay, so what we need to do is within our script, we need to have a line that basically tells Ansible, hey, use the Python interpreter to run this file, and that's where the shebang comes into play. And I actually can't remember what the syntax is. I believe it's I think it's pound exclamation point, and then what we're going to say is we're going to say user bin env. Now env is actually a program that we can use, and then we're going to say Python 3. So what this is going to tell the operating system is to use this env program along with Python 3, and it's going to tell it to run the Python 3 interpreter. Anyway, moving on. Let's do some import statements. So we're going to be making an API call to Nautobot, and we're going to pull some devices. Now, if I go to Nautobot, I already have a site set up called Lab 13. Okay, so if we go to Organization, Sites, and then Lab 13, you can see we have 4 devices. So red router, red switch, yellow router, yellow switch. These are the devices that we want to pull the data for in our API call. Okay, and then just so you guys are tracking, this is the Nautobot server in Pinewood currently. So 192.168.128.15. Anyways, going back to our script. So we need to set up some API variables, but before we can do that, we have to import the requests module so we can make an API call to Nautobot. So let's make some import statements. So we'll say import requests, and then because I know we're gonna have to do this later, when we run this API call, we're gonna run into some self-signed certificate warnings. So what we can do to disable those is first we're going to import the URL lib3 package, and then we're going to enter this command right here. I honestly don't ever memorize this. I just pull it from another script that's already been written because you really don't need to remember this line. But just understand that this is going to disable the self-signed certificate warnings that might pop up. Okay. So with that, we can go ahead and define some basic API parameters. So the first thing we're probably going to need is the URL that we're going to use in our API call. So let's make a variable, and we're going to set the variable name to all caps, so it's going to be constant, and we're going to call it Nautobot URL, and this will be equal to a string. So it's going to be https://192.168.128.15/DCIM/devices. So we're going to pull all of the devices from Nautobot, and we'll just add a parameter later so that we can pull all the devices from the Lab 13 site. But for right now, this is all we need for the URL. And then we're also going to need, if you remember from the application integration labs, we're also going to need the API token. So let's go ahead and name a variable, and we'll call it Nautobot token. And let's go ahead and go to Nautobot and pull the API token. So if we go to the profile for the Nautobot user, API tokens, and let's go ahead and copy this guy. put it in our script. Cool. So now we have the URL and the token. In the past labs, we manually specified what HTTP method we were going to use. We can actually use a different. We can actually make our API call without explicitly defining our method, and I'll show you how to do that in a minute. But that being said, the next thing to configure would be our headers. So again, create another constant, and this is going to be equal to a dictionary. So opening curly brace, and the first header we're going to create is accept, and we're going to set that to application/JSON. And the second one is going to be content type. Again, just kind of filling out our baseline headers. So set that to application JSON as well. And then the last thing we need, this is going to be the authorization header. And we're going to set that equal to, we're going to use an F string. So we're going to say F quote, and then we're going to say the word token with a capital T, space, and then Nautobot token, because this is the format that Nautobot expects it in. And then lastly, let's go ahead and define some parameters. So parameters, again, this is going to be equal to a dictionary. And the only parameter we need is the site. Again, because we're pulling all of the devices in the Nautobot server using this URL, but we only want to pull devices from the lab13 site. So we'll say site is equal to orco_lab13. And then that should be all we need. And now we've got all the ingredients prepared. Let's go ahead and cook the recipe. So let's go ahead and make a variable called devices. And we'll even call this lab13 devices. And we'll set this equal to requests. Now in the past, what we did was we said requests.request. And then the first parameter we passed was method. So we'd select method is equal to get or something like that. What we can do is just use a specific function within the request module that correlates to an HTTP method. So in this case, we can actually just say requests.get, which is a different method within the package. And this function will assume that we're using the get method. So we don't have to use that parameter anymore. So now we just pass the URL. So we'll say URL is equal to Nautobot URL. Headers is equal to our constant. And then params equals parameters. And then lastly, we'll say verify is equal to false. Now this would give us a response object. But we want to extract the JSON data from that response object. So we're going to use the .json method on the response object that would be returned by this API call. Okay. So at this point, we can go ahead and run our script. We're not printing anything out, but we can at least verify that it works. So we'll say Python 3 Nautobot inventory.py. Cool. So it worked, no issues. To make our lives easier, because what we're going to do now is we have that JSON data, but now we need to restructure it to build the format that we see in this output JSON file. Okay. To make it easier on ourselves, let's go ahead and recreate this API call in Thunder Client really quick. So I already have it installed on my VM, which by the way, I'm running this on a lab VM that's running rel 8.5, I believe. Now I've just logged into that VM using a remote SSH. And then on that VM, I went ahead and installed the Thunder Client extension. So anyways, let's go ahead and hit new request. And we can just copy all the components. So we'll start with the URL. Leave the method set to get. For the headers, we'll say accept to application JSON. Set the content type to the same thing. And then the authorization header. Okay, and then lastly, we need to apply our parameter. So site is equal to Orco lab 13. Okay, cool. So go ahead and test it out. All right, so we have some results. Now let's go ahead and open it in a JSON file. That way we know what the outputted data is going to look like. And this is going to make it a little bit easier because, again, we've got to restructure this data. So looking at the JSON data, at the top level we have a few keys. We've got count, so it looks like in total there were 4 devices from that site. And then we have the results key, which is equal to a list. And it might be hard to tell, but this list is a list of dictionaries where each dictionary represents a device. So I can actually minimize each one of these dictionaries. And you can see we have 4 pairs of curly braces. So 1, 2, 3, and 4. So let's go ahead and open one of the dictionaries. So this is the first one, the first device. We have a few top level keys like ID, URL, and the name. And then device type, and it's actually there's actually a lot of information here. All we're really going to need is the device's host name, its primary IP address, and its device type. What we're going to do is let's go ahead and start building our inventory. So I'm going to go ahead and close the Thunder Client tab because all I need is this actual JSON file. The first thing we're going to do is we're going to get to work building the host vars portion of our inventory. So again, looking at the output file, we need to have a meta key that then has a host vars key. And within this host vars dictionary, each key is going to be a device's host name. And then this key is going to have a value of yet another dictionary where each key value pair is going to be a variable. In this case, we're only going to set 2 variables. We're going to set the Ansible host and device type. So we're going to have to figure out how to pull each device's host name, and then this, like its primary IP address, and then the device type from the data in the API call. So in the actual Ansible Lab 13 guide, it's going to have you do it within a Python terminal, but I'm just going to show you how to do it via the actual Thunder Client outputted data just as an alternative method. So anyways, in order to build the host vars, let's go ahead and create an empty host vars dictionary. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a variable called host vars, and we're going to set this to a dictionary, so open and curly brace, and then we're going to start building out the scaffolding, so to speak. So we're going to make a key called _meta. And this will be equal to another dictionary with another key called host vars. And this, for now, is just going to be set to an empty dictionary. And now that we have our scaffolding, what we're going to do is we're going to loop through each one of the devices in our JSON data. And then for each device, we're going to create a key equal to the device's host name. And then this key is going to have a value of a dictionary, and in that dictionary, we're going to then create the 2 variables. So we'll start off our loop. We're going to say for device in lab 13 devices, which is the variable we defined up here. Now this gave us our JSON data, but within that JSON data, we need to loop through the results list, which again is a list of dictionaries where each dictionary represents a device. So we're going to say for device in lab 13 devices, and then we're going to say the results key, okay? And then so for each device, we want to add a key to this empty host vars dictionary where the key is the device's name. So we're going to say host vars, which is our variable up here, _meta, then host vars, and then what we're going to say is we're going to use the .update dictionary method, and then what we're going to add to it is a whole new dictionary, and within this dictionary, again, we need to have a key equal to the device's host name. So we're going to say device name. So the key is called name, and I know that because if I look at the JSON data, if we look at the first device, okay, starting with this curly brace. If we go down, we see this name key, and that's equal to the device's host name, which is what we need. So in our loop, when we're looping through that list, we need to reference that device like a dictionary and then pull the name key, which will return that value. Now that's going to be the key of our dictionary, which is then going to be set to yet another dictionary, so opening curly brace. And now within this dictionary is where we're going to define our variables. So the first one is going to be Ansible host, and we're going to set that to, let's figure it out. All right, so going back to the first device dictionary, let's try and find something related to its primary IP address. So here's the starting curly brace. So looking at the top level keys, if I scroll down a little bit, I see device role, I see the tenant, its platform, site, rack, parent device, status, and here we see a key called primary IP. And this is set to a dictionary. I can tell that because of the opening and closing curly braces. And within this dictionary, we have a few keys. What we're after, though, is either this address key or the display key. They're the same thing, so we can use either one. I'm going to use the address key. So back in our loop, again, we're defining a variable called Ansible host, and we're going to set it to device primary IP4, which we were actually looking at this primary IP key, but if you keep looking, there's a primary IP4 key as well as a primary IP6. Specificity is always better, so let's go with the primary IP4 key in our script. And then within that dictionary, if you recall, we had the key called address. All right. So I know this is a lot, but again, what we did was we looped through each device in the data returned by our API call. Okay. Now, with each iteration of this loop, we have access to a device, which is a dictionary. Okay. So for each one of these devices, we're going to create within this host vars dictionary, which is already defined up top, we're going to add a new key, which is equal to the device's name. And this key has a value of a dictionary, where so far we've defined one key value pair, which in the inventory, the actual Ansible inventory, this will become a host level variable. Okay, but we've defined this one variable called Ansible host, and we've set it to the device's primary IPv4 address. All right. So that being said, we have our basic script built. So let's actually print out our host vars and see what it looks like. Okay. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the JSON module to actually print it out in a formatted way. So back up at the top, let's add an import statement. We're going to say import JSON. And now within the JSON module, we're going to reference the JSON.dumpString function. Okay. So what we're going to say is we're going to say print JSON.dumps, which stands for dump string, open parenthesis, and then the variable that we want to print in JSON. So we're going to print the host vars variable, comma, and then we're going to tell it how many spaces we want per indentation. So we're going to say indent equals 4. Okay. And now let's go ahead and run our script and see what the output looks like. So I'm actually going to say Python 3 Nautobot inventory, and then I'm going to output it into a new file called inventory output.json. Cool. And then let's go ahead and open that file. All right, so it looks like it worked successfully. So let's take a look at the data. Again, we have opening and closing curly braces. The first key is that underscore meta key, so that looks correct. Within that, we have a dictionary with a key called host vars. Again, this is looking good. This is set to yet another dictionary, where within this dictionary, the host name of each device is a key, so that looks good. And then for each one of these device dictionaries, we have the key value pairs representing a variable and its value. So one problem we have so far, although the structure is fine, one problem is that the Ansible host variable needs to be set to just an IP address, but we have an IP address /mask. So let's go ahead and fix that in our inventory. So right here, where we add the device's primary IPv4 address, if we look at the return data from our API call, you can see that indeed the address key right here underneath the primary IP4 is set to the IP address /the mask. So what we can do in our script is we can take that value, and then we're actually going to split it on the /. So we're going to say dot split, and then quotes /. Now this is going to produce a list where the first item in the list is the IP address, and then the second item in the list is the CIDR notation of the subnet mask. We just want the IP address, so we're going to reference the 0 index of that list, which will give us the IP address. Let's go ahead and do this in a terminal so you can see what I'm talking about. So I just say Python 3. We'll create a variable called IP address, and we'll set this to a string. So we'll say 192.168.1.1/24, just like that. So if we say IP address dot split and then split it on the /, this is what we get. See, we get a list where the first item in the list is the IP address and the second item is the CIDR notation. So if we press up arrow and then reference the 0 index of that list, we then get just the IP address, and that's what we're doing here. So if we exit out of this terminal, and then let's go ahead and rerun our script and output it against that inventory output.json file. So Python 3, Nautobot inventory into the inventory output.json. And now if we look at our new data, you can see that in our host vars, the Ansible host variable is set to just the IP address, which is what we want. So that's great. Now let's add a second variable for each device. Now this one is going to be set to the device type. Now this is going to be set to either router or switch. Okay. So let's hit a comma right here, and then we'll go ahead and define our second variable. So we'll say device type. Now we need to figure out where the device type data is within the JSON data from our API call. So going back to this second tab, let's look for the device type. I imagine there's probably just a device type key somewhere. If we keep going up, and here we go. So within this first device dictionary, we have a key called device type. Now within this dictionary, we have a few different keys that we can look at. This is actually the manufacturer. I'm going to minimize the manufacturer part of it, but the device type has a few keys like ID, URL, manufacturer, model, slug, and display. One thing to note about Nautobot is the display key is actually the manufacturer name plus the model name, but we just want the model. So the key we want is the model key. So go back to our script, and so we're going to say device type, and then we want the model key within that dictionary. Again, just looking at the JSON output, we're saying from this device we want the device type and then the model key within that device type dictionary. Alright, so again, let's open our terminal. Let's output that into our JSON file and then take a look at the results. And now you can see for each device we have a device type, and each one is appropriate. So the red router has a device type of router, and red switch has a device type of switch, so on and so forth. And that's really going to do it for this basic host vars section. Again, all the host vars is just a basic index of each individual host, and then any host level variables you want to set to each device. The most important thing here is the structure that it has to be in. The host vars portion of the inventory has to have this underscore meta key. Within that, it has to have a host vars key, and then within that, each key must be a device's host name. and then each one of those host names needs to be set to a dictionary with key value pairs. All right, so now let's get to work on the groups portion of the inventory. So kind of like before, what we're going to do is we're going to create the scaffolding, and then we're going to fill in the blanks, so to speak. So let's create a new variable called groups, and we'll set this equal to I would set it equal to an empty dictionary, but let's go ahead and create a group called all. So within the groups portion of the inventory, Ansible is going to assume that any key is going to be a group name. So if I make a key within this group's variable and I call it all, this is going to be a group called all. Okay. Now, by default, Ansible will actually make the all group for us. However, again, specificity is always the preferred policy, right? So even though Ansible would make an all group for us, it's just best practice to define it manually and add any hosts or children groups to it if we want. Okay. So for right now, we're just going to get all, and we're going to set it equal to a dictionary, and then we're going to create the children key, right? Because like I said earlier, if you remember, groups can have, or group dictionaries can have 3 different keys, okay? They can have a children key, a host key, or a vars key. In this case, we are going to add children, but for right now, we're going to set it equal to an empty list, okay? So now we have our scaffolding. We can go ahead and add groups to this variable. So in our example inventory, we're going to create 4 groups beside the all group. We're going to make one based on each device's enclave or its classification level, and then we're also going to group devices based on their device type. Okay. So if you notice, each one of the devices says either red or yellow. This is supposed to indicate like the enclave. So we're going to create a group called red devices that will house the red router and red switch. And then we're going to create another group called yellow devices that houses the yellow router and yellow switch. And then we're going to make 2 more groups. One group is going to be called routers, which will have the yellow router and the red router. And then we'll have a 4th group called switches, which will have the red switch and the yellow switch. So to make the first group, what we're going to do is, again, each key within this groups portion of the inventory is going to be the name of a group. So we'll call this one red devices. So this will be any red device, and this will be equal to a dictionary. Now with this one, we're not going to have any child groups. We're literally going to put devices into the group itself. So we're actually going to use the hosts key in this case. Now hosts is just going to be a list of host names. So we're going to create an empty list for right now. And then we're going to do this, we're going to use the same structure for each of the other 3 groups. So we'll create, we'll say comma, and then our next group is going to be yellow devices. Again, set that equal to a dictionary. And here we're going to use as hosts and set that equal to an empty dictionary. On to the next group. So this one's just going to be called routers. And give that a host key. And then our last group, which is switches. And again, just give it an empty host list. We're about to use some more Python logic to actually populate these host lists, but this will do for right now. And now that we have these child groups, we can actually add them to the children list of the all group, which will make these nested groups of the all group. So let's go ahead and do that. So red devices, comma, yellow devices, comma, routers, oops, and switches. Cool. So now any host that we put in these child groups will automatically be a member of the all group because they are nested. Okay. So now we can actually populate these groups with host names. So let's start off with the red devices group. So what we're going to do is we're actually, in order to do this in a very simple way, we're just going to loop through the existing host vars, and then we're going to use each device's host name. And if any particular host name contains the word red, we're just going to add that host name to the host list. So here's what that's going to look like. We're going to say for host name in host vars, which is that variable we defined above, and then we're going to reference the meta key, and then the host vars key. And since within that dictionary each device host name is a key, we're just going to say .keys. That way we can loop through each device host name. Okay. And now within our for loop, we're going to say if red in host name, meaning if the string red is in that device's host name, then we're going to add that device's host name to this host list. So we're going to say groups red devices, and then hosts, which this key has a value of an empty list, so we're going to say .append, which is our list method, and then we're going to append host name. Okay, and that's all there is to it. So now in our print statement, instead of printing host vars, let's actually print the groups variable and see what it looks like. Okay, so looking at the output file. All right, so at the very root level, we have a dictionary indicated by the opening curly brace. Again, within the groups portion, Ansible is going to assume any key is a group name. So we see the all group, and it has a children key, and this is just a list of group names. So red devices, yellow devices, routers, and switches. Pretty simple. But now if we look at our red devices group, we can see that host list has two hosts. We have OrcoLab 3 red router and red switch, and it's only because they had the string red in their host name. Okay, so it's as simple as that. So if we want to do the same thing for the yellow devices, let's go ahead and copy this code, and we will paste it a couple lines down. But now we're just going to say, we're going to change our if statement. So we'll say if yellow in host name, we're going to add it to the yellow devices group, just like that. Okay, and we'll do the same thing for the other two groups. Now, if the other two, we're not going to look for red or yellow, we're going to look for router or switch. So in this third group, we're going to say if router in host name, we're going to add it to the routers group. And then for the fourth group, we're going to say if switch in host name, we're going to add it to the switches group. And that should be all we need to complete the groups. So again, let's run it and output it to that file and take a look. Cool, now the yellow devices is populated with the yellow router and yellow switch. Routers has the red router and yellow router, and then the switches has the red switch and yellow switch. So with that being said, we have the two parts of our inventory. So all we need to do now is just combine them into one variable, and that's pretty simple. What we typically do is we just create an inventory variable. So we're going to say inventory, and we're going to set this equal to an empty dictionary. And then we're just going to add the groups and the host vars to our inventory. So we'll say inventory.update and then host vars, and then inventory.update groups. And then lastly, if you remember, at the end of the day, Ansible just needs the script to print some sort of valid JSON. Okay. Before, we were using this print statement to print out the data so we could just look at it and make sure that we're doing everything correctly. But now that we have everything built, we actually just need to use the statement to build to print the entire inventory itself. Okay, so we're going to say print JSON.dumps inventory indent equals 4. Okay, this should be all we need. Now that being said, we have one additional step. we'll see if we run into issues. But what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to use the Ansible inventory command to test our new inventory. So what I'm going to say is Ansible-inventory-I, and then Nautobot inventory.py, and then I'm going to say -- graph. Okay, and it actually worked. So if we do -- graph, it actually shows you the group structure of your inventory, which is pretty cool. But that being said, this command would not work if we had messed something up. But anyways, kind of looking at the output, you can see at the root level, we have that all group. And since we made all the other 4 groups children of the all group, you can see these are like one indentation level underneath all. So you can see red devices and then each device within that group. Now, this graph option will not show you the host vars. It's only going to show you the groups and then their respective hosts. All right. We could try something else. We can try -- list. Oh, that worked. Cool. Okay. So the -- list option will actually show you the JSON output. So all this is really doing is printing the JSON formatted version of our inventory, which is the same thing our script is already doing. But you can see at the very top we have our meta section with the host vars, and then past that each key is a group. So we have the all group, red devices, so on and so forth. So that's a couple of handy commands. With that being said, let's go ahead and run a playbook against our inventory. So within our little Scratch folder, let's create a new file. We'll just call it example.yaml. So 3 dashes to indicate this is a YAML document. This is a playbook, which is just a list of plays. So our first play will be denoted with a dash. The name of the play will just be example. We'll say gather facts is false, and we'll say connection is local, and then let's create our tasks list. So tasks, this is going to be a list of tasks. Each one is a dictionary or an object. So the first item is going to be denoted with a dash. Name, we'll just print something, and let's use the debug module. So we'll say debug, and then we'll say var device type. Cool. So now we have our playbook. All we're going to do is for each device, we're going to print that device type variable, which, if you remember, is one of the host vars that we defined in our inventory script. So let's go ahead and run that playbook. So Ansible playbook example.yaml-I Nautobot inventory.py. Go ahead and run that. Oh, forgot to set our hosts. And we'll set that to the all group for right now. Up arrow. Cool. So we have some output, and you can see for each device, we printed the device type. So for like lab 13 red router, the output was router. Red switch had an output of switch, so on and so forth. So that was a basic inventory script. Again, at the end of the day, Ansible just needs the script to output JSON formatted data, and it needs to fit this format that I talked about, right? So the host vars, let me look at the actual output. So the host vars has to have underscore meta, and then host vars, and then again, each key is going to be a device's name, and then that is going to be set to a dictionary where each key value pair is a variable and its value. Okay. Now after the host vars portion of the inventory, every key will be considered a group. Each group dictionary can have 3 keys. We can have a children key, we can have a hosts key, or we can have a vars key. So I'll show you one more thing. Let me go to my inventory itself. So in the all key, let's add another one called vars. Okay. And vars has to be a dictionary, so opening and closing curly brace. And then we can define key value pairs, kind of like how we did with host vars. So let's create one called domain name, and we'll just set this equal to local.com. Okay. Now let's go back to our playbook, and instead of printing the device type, we can just print the domain name variable. and we'll just hit up arrow on our playbook command. And now you can see for each device, we printed local.com. Okay, so in our inventory script, if we wanted to statically assign variables, we could do that using the vars key. So going back to what I was saying before, each group can have 3 keys. We can have children, vars, and then a host list. Anyways, with that, that's all I have. Thanks for watching, and I hope you have a good one.